Cephalopods, which include squids, have 3 hearts in total. Mammals have 4-chambered hearts, amphibians 3, fishes 2, and so on. Now on to the human heart. The human heart has 4 chambers, 2 atria and 2 ventricles. It is located between the lungs in the thoracic cavity, slightly towards the left of the sternum or the breastbone. The functions include maintaining the blood pressure, pumping of the blood, and so on. The heart is divided into 4 chambers, the left and right atrium and the right and left ventricle. Atrium receives blood while ventricles pumps it. The 2 ventricles are separated by a wall known as the interventricular septum. Atria and ventricles are separated by the atrioventricular septum. As you can see on the image toward the right, the heart has 4 valves, which separates its chambers and prevents backward flow of blood. The valves present between the atrium and the ventricles are known as the atrioventricular valves. The tricuspid valves lie between the right atrium and the right ventricle, while the mitral or the bicuspid valve lie between the left atrium and the left ventricle. Pulmonary valves lie at the base of the pulmonary artery, while the semilunar valves lie at the exit of each ventricle. Now on to the arteries and the veins. Arteries carries blood away from the heart, while the veins There are 3 types of blood circulation, namely the pulmonary, systematic, and coronary. Pulmonary circulation is responsible for carrying the oxygenated blood away from the heart. Systematic brings in oxygen to various organs in the body. Coronary circulation supplies oxygenated blood to the cardiac muscles. The heart is enclosed within a fluid-filled cavity known as the pericardial cavity. The walls and linings are made up of fibrous membranes known as the pericardium. The pericardial fluid is a serous fluid secreted by the serous layers lining the pericardium. It has the role of protecting the heart by lubricating it, and it thereby prevents friction between surrounding organs. It holds the heart in its position and maintains a hollow space. The pericardium has 2 exclusive layers, the visceral and the parietal. The visceral layer directly covers the outside of the heart. The parietal layer forms a sac around the outer regions of the heart. Now on to the cardiac cycle. So what is the cardiac cycle? Well, the cardiac cycle is a series of events in one heartbeat. It is a series of contraction and relaxations that take place in the heart while it is pumping the blood. Now for the various phases of the cardiac cycle. So let's start with the joint diastole. During this phase, both the tricuspid and bicuspid valves are wide open. Blood flows freely from vena cava and pulmonary veins into the atria and starts filling it up. Also, during this very moment, the ventricles fill passively, and almost 70% of the blood fills up the ventricles. Semilunar valves are however closed. The sinoatrial node generates an action potential during this stage, which starts the atrial systole. During the atrial systole, the remaining 30% of the blood goes into the ventricles. The atrioventricular valves are open, but the semilunar valves are still closed. The action potential reaches the ventricular walls by the end of the stage via the atrioventricular node and a bundle of His, which finally leads to the ventricular systole. During the ventricular systole, the increased ventricular pressure causes the tricuspid and bicuspid valve to open up. This causes the first heart sound or the love sound. Further increase in this pressure opens up the semilunar valves. Blood flows into the pulmonary artery and the aorta. This phase also coincides with the atrial diastole. During the ventricular diastole, the ventricular pressure drops and thereby the semilunar valves closes. This produces the second heart sound or the dub sound. Further drop in this ventricular pressure and simultaneous filling up of blood in the atria causes the tricuspid and bicuspid valves to open. Now coming to the EKG or the ECG. The EKG is also known as the electrocardiograph, which is a graphical representation of the electrical activity that takes place during the cardiac cycle. The sinoatrial node is also known as the natural pacemaker of the heart because it generates the much needed impulse for the cardiac cycle. The AV node is known as the gatekeeper of the heart because it decides which impulse to let through. If the SA node produces a weak impulse, then the AV node will produce its own impulse. The SA node has a capacity to produce 60 to 100 beats per minute. The AV node and the bundle of His has the capacity to produce 40 to 60 beats per minute, and the Purkinje fibers and the branches, the left and right bundle branches, has a capacity to produce 20 to 40 beats per minute. Now let's have a look at the various parts of the EKG or the ECG. It is divided into the PR interval, the PR segment, the QRS complex, the ST segment, and the QT interval. The P wave represents the depolarization of atria in response to the SA node. It should always be upright, or it can indicate some form of dysrhythmia. The QRX complex, which is the tall structure which you can see in the diagram, represents ventricular depolarization. Depolarization is for contraction and repolarization is for relaxation. The T wave, on the other hand, represents ventricular repolarization. Every depolarization is followed by a repolarization. Now let's have a look at the EKG paper. As you can see, one big box is representing 0.2 seconds, while one small box will represent a time interval of 0.4 seconds. Now let's inspect the EKG strip closely. As you can see, one small box is representing 0.2 seconds. So how much would 15 such boxes represent? Well, the answer is simple. Just multiply 15 by 0.2 and you would end up with 3 seconds. On similar lines, 30 such boxes shall represent 6 seconds. There's another famous method to calculate the number of beats by interpreting the EKG. This method is known as the 300 method. For this method, take 300 and divide it by the number of 0.2 second boxes which you can see between two Rs. Thanks a lot.